Nationalismen som ökar och vad är effekterna på kvinnors rättigheter. Vi kommer faktiskt ha det här seminariet på engelska. Och jag hoppas att det går bra för er, för att vi har ju en gäst från Serbien med oss här, Snezana. Och för att kunna få till ett samtal här på scen så blir det mycket bättre om vi kan göra det på engelska. Vi kommer ha tid för frågor, ungefär den sista kvarten, frågor och diskussion även med er. Och då får ni förstås gärna ställa era frågor på svenska, om ni föredrar det. Innan vi kör igång så vill jag bara berätta också att det här seminariet kommer att webbsändas direkt och spelas in. För att även de som då inte är på plats här idag kan få ta del av det här, av samtalet och debatten. Och därför så är det också viktigt att vi har mikrofon sen när vi ska ställa frågor. Så det kommer vara en person som går runt med mikrofon. Och man får också gärna twittra in frågor för den som då tittar på det här över nätet nu. Och så kommer vi också ta lite Twitterfrågor blandat med publikfrågorna här från publiken på plats. Så, då ska vi börja helt enkelt.
Är det någon? Ja, tack. Så kan vi bara ta fram den. Det var hyggligt. Tack ska
Okay, so I should introduce myself as well. My name is Sarah Duarte. I work for the foundation Expo, which is a anti-racism foundation in Sweden, which was founded in the mid-90s when the Nazi and extreme right movements were very visible and violent. And we can see, unfortunately, a sort of development where today as well, the neo-Nazi groups and parties are actually mobilizing in a way which we haven't seen for quite a while, and which is very tangible, which is very noticeable here in Almedalen this year, since we have an actual Nazi party standing and spreading their racist, anti-Semitic messages here in the political week in Almedalen. And as we all know as well, today the Sweden Democrats and their party leader will hold their speech here in Almedalen. So nationalism is on the rise, and it's not only on the rise in Sweden, but also in several different countries in Europe. It takes quite different forms. We have the more right-wing populist parties, and there's the parties that are on the extreme right, and even the Nazi parties. But they share a few very central traits, and usually nationalism is a very... And today, of course, with Kvinna till kvinna, woman to woman, this organization in cooperation with Expo have written a report called Patriotism and Patriarchy, Folk, familj och fosterland, in which we study in a few cases, the authors here have gone in and studied how nationalism and nationalistic parties of different kinds are trying to sort of marginalize the women in different ways. The rights of women are being threatened across Europe due to this rhetoric, and in sometimes as well in actual policies. So this is the focus for the seminar today. And with us we have a very nice panel. We have Lena Ag, Secretary General for Kvinna till kvinna. We have Snezana Jakovljevic. I hope I pronounced it okay. President for the NGO Sandglass in Kruševac, Serbia, which is an organization with a purpose of building and strengthening women's networks. And she is a long-time women's rights activist. And we have Annika Hamrud, who is a freelance journalist and author, who has been focusing primarily on the Sweden Democrats and on populist parties in Europe. So we're going to just start right away. We don't have that much time, and we want to have as well some interaction, of course. So I'm going to start with you, Lena. How did this report, Patriotism and Patriarchy, from Kvinna till kvinna and the Expo Foundation, how did it come about? Why did you?
It's actually why we did it was actually last year in Almedalen, because then we saw the normalization of the Sweden Democrats. I was pretty shocked with what I saw then. Sweden Democrats in all the TV sofas everywhere, and the treatment of the Sweden Democrats as a normal, mainstream Swedish party, which I for our part was rather upsetting, because of course Kvinna has its roots to a certain extent in the Balkans. This is, during the war in the Balkans, which was a war driven by ethno-nationalism in the beginning of the 1990s. This is what we saw, how nationalism was actually, the phrase ethnic cleansing was coined during the war, and we saw, hundreds and thousands of victims, deaths, refugees, raped women, etc., etc. So, and this whole war was built on the fear of the other, actually the fear of your neighbor. And so hearing the Sweden Democrats constantly bringing up the war in the Balkans as a kind of example of how, the multicultural society was broken up because it couldn't function and it was leading to war, was just completely, for me, who's been, we've been in the Balkans for many years, it was just upsetting, because everybody who knows anything about what triggered the war in Bosnia, etc., knows that it was exactly the opposite. It was nationalism, extreme nationalism, that triggered the war. So we thought we need to look at this together with Expo, and we went to the roots where we had a lot of partners in the Balkans. So we wanted to look at the lived experience of living with nationalism ingrained in society.
And what would you say are the most important findings in this report?
Well, our starting point from our side was the Balkans, and I know that Snezana will talk more about this later, but just let's say that today the situation in the Balkans has its roots in the war, and much of recent history in the Balkans has focused on creating an identity as a Bosniak, Croat or Serb, and with religions and stories of each group's suffering during the past as a kind of basis. So nationalism is ingrained in the societies in Bosnia, in Serbia, in Croatia, and elsewhere. And it contributes to a climate of confrontation, of homophobia, ethnic discrimination, and actually open hostility towards feminism and women's rights. And I know that Snezana will give us some more concrete examples of this. So it is of grave concern to us, with our background in these, situations of conflict, when we see what is happening now in Sweden and in the rest of Europe.
And Annika, I'd like to direct this question to you, because you studied a few other countries in Europe besides the Balkans in this report. And what would you say that the situation is like in these countries?
Well, we looked at... So, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm also a little... It's the parade going behind us. It's for diversity. So
Good.
It's very nice to have that as a background. And so I think a lot of people are doing these things today because it's the Sweden Democrats Day. And I'm very glad for this resistance that is sort of new this year. But yes, we looked at the rest of Europe. And what you can see is how nationalism's different phases. We decided to choose some different countries, and we chose Hungary, Austria, France, the Netherlands, and Sweden, all sort of in our proximity. And there you can see how these different nations and parties are very different. And we call them nationalists here, but you can see how, for example, this spreads from the actually pure fascist party Jobbik in Hungary, to the more extreme right-wing populist anti-Muslim party led by Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. So those are very different, but at the same time they are all based on the same thing, and that is that they look for enemies, that it's a group that looks for enemies to where you put all the blame for everything that is bad. What we did was to see how these different parties in these different countries, how they look at women and gender roles and feminism. And it's very clear, if you take fascism, for example. Fascism is from its very beginning in Italy a reaction towards a society that was seen as having become more feminized. Do you say feminized? Yes, so that's
Feminine,
more feminine. And you should reinstate the man, the manliness, the power, the strength, and create a new citizen. And that's where it all comes from. And Kvinna till Kvinna has used the term that nationalism is the antipode of feminism. And there that is very clear how in the very beginning it started like that. But we have also, and can see that how a Sweden democratic writer on the website of Pixlat explains how Breivik in Norway grew up without a father, and how him committing these atrocities was the reason behind it was the feminized society in Norway.
What else would you say is this? What they say is the feminine part of society.
The feminine part is to the anti-violence, caring, the softer sides,
and even democratic side,
democratic
perhaps,
sides,
fascism.
the talking about problems rather than just dealing with them, and that classic sort of gender roles.
Lena,
can I say also to kind of complement what you're saying is that what we also found is that even though that these nationalists have different shapes and forms, and even come from very different geographical backgrounds and even ideological backgrounds, they share this animosity against the feminist movement, and their policies overall goes against anything that the women's movement and women have been fighting for when it comes to rights and freedoms during the decades. And what we see basically is in 4 areas, and we can complement each other on this. And the development now with more nationalist representation in the European Parliament doesn't mean that they absolutely have a direct influence on policies. But what they can influence is the political climate, the climate of discourse in Europe and in Sweden. And this is what we want to kind of just put the finger on. And we have identified 4 areas where there might be an influence from, and I say might be, because it all depends on us, right, to have an influence. And the first one is of course the ancient demand from the women's movement to have the right to combine both working life, a job of your own, with children and family. Which means, economic independence for women, where, and the access to the labor market, the access to childcare, where the national parties' family policies have direct influence on the possibility for women to actually go out and work. Reproductive rights, for instance, when it comes to abortions, where we can see it's different. It differs between the parties because they are also contextual. They relate to the context that they are in. So some parties are dead against abortion, whereas others are, but they all share this hostility against abortion. And we've seen Jimmy Åkesson being interviewed, and putting forward arguments. Doesn't have anything to do with women's rights. It has to do with the rights of the child and so on. But still, then this stereotypical view of gender. What is a man? What is a woman? And the view of the family being not the variety that we know is, a family. What is a Swedish family or a French family or a Serb family today? It's a variety, and we know that. That's how, what reality looks like. They go back and they say there's just one family. It's the heterosexual family, a man, a father, mother, and children. So it's very stereotypical in that sense. And then we have violence against women, which is basically something that we all know this is a global problem. It exists all around the world. And it is a real problem, It transcends class, it transcends geographical borders, and it affects millions of women all over the world. However, when nationalists look at it, it is always in conjunction with immigration. It's always something that happens to the other women, not our women. And so these are kind of the major gists of the report.
It's interesting just how nationalism is very focused always on these borders, right, and where to draw the line, which is actually also really relevant when it comes to national identity and who can belong to it. Where is this line? And I would like to ask you, Annika, in the case of France, for example, Front National, they have had some politics relating to reproductive rights in a way.
Yes.
What's happening there?
Well, Front National, as you know, they got 25% in the European election. The Front National has put forward different suggestions where they want there to be more, benefits for families if they have more children. So you will get more money if you have more children, but only if you are French. So these child allowances will only go to white people and not to other families. You would also, but there is another thing as well. They will give you more money on top of that, and with if you stay at home, if you don't work as a woman. But they also will then check you so that you behave. And if they don't think that you live according to how they think you should live, they will ask the money back. So,
and how do they define this French woman? Who is French?
Well, I don't really know. That is.
But the background is that they mean that the non-French women are having a bit more children, right?
Yes,
so
they think that there's a problem with non-French women having more children. So, of course, in the ground, what it is all about is that there should be more French people being born, French babies, so that the French culture, the French people should be more. So even though we say that they're not biologically racist, yes, they are. They want to have more French people.
Can I just say that for nationalists, demography is important. And this is how we should view also their anti-abortion stance to a certain extent.
Yes.
Is that they want their own group to bear more children.
Yes.
Not the others, of course, but their own group. So that's why nationalists, by default is hostile to abortion.
What would you say in the case of Sweden, for example, the Sweden Democrats? Do they have any policies relating to this?
They also want to raise what is called vårdnadsbidrag to make it possible. All nationalist parties, childcare allowance. Yeah. All nationalist parties are collective parties. They have an ideology that is where the smallest group is the family and not the individual, and therefore they always want to see that a family should take care of the child, which in fact means that the woman should take up the child. The child should not let and she should stay at home. That's what all parties think, including Sweden Democrats.
And going to the Netherlands then, one of the main issues of Geert Wilders and his party is actually gay rights, and he's promoting gay rights and kind of opposing it to the Muslims somehow. How is he pushing this agenda?
Well, in Holland, they have very much succeeded in portraying Muslims as a threat to the modern society, and for the Sweden Democrats have tried this as well. We haven't succeeded as much in Sweden, but it's been very successful in Holland. Where they have succeeded to make that they want to protect the rights for LGBTQ persons by saying that the Muslims are a threat to women and to gay people. Although, if you look at what we have done is that we have looked at Geert Wilders' program, and I say Geert Wilders, even the party is called the Freedom Party, but in actuality there is only one member in that party, and that is Geert Wilders. So it's not a democratic party, but then he doesn't have any program about women or gays or transgender people. Nothing. He has no policy whatsoever. Women and gays are just being used here as to use them or us as to portray the Muslims as dangerous. Another interesting thing is that he also has policies against Muslim women. He has, for example, suggested that there should be a tax posed on women if they want to wear a veil. So they should have to pay a sort of fee.
We can really see how these minority groups are really being targeted directly as well.
Yes.
Not only being excluded from the policies, but actually
no, of course. I mean, the party, if you look at it, the ideology in itself for the nationalists is, of course, they talk about their own women. But you can also see how it's the women on the outside that, of course, are the most affected by this policy.
But I mean, but it's interesting. It's interesting that in Holland, I mean, that's how you can see these differences. In Holland, you know, it's kind of protecting gay rights and LGBT people. Well, in other places, it's completely the contrary, of course, because LGBT people and women's rights activists, women's rights defenders, are kind of breaking with a norm, meaning that they are also harassed and are kind of sticking out. So it's really adapting to the society where you're in, to a certain extent.
We've talked a bit about the reproductive rights. I just want to also mention the right to abortion, which is being called into question in several European countries now. Spain, for example, experiencing a very big backlash here. But what would you say?
A lot of people went out, and you know, they made opinion polls in Spain, and 60% of the Spaniards is pro-abortion. I mean, they are for this. So there is a battle going on in Spain right now.
And in Spain, of course, it's the Conservative Party pushing this agenda, not really a nationalist party in that sense. But in these countries as well, what would you say? Could you give some examples of what types of arguments these nationalistic parties use when it comes to kind of restricting the right to abortion?
Well, if you listen to Jimmy Åkesson, for example, he says that you should limit the time where you can have abortion till week 12.
Yes.
And he says that it is because now you can, the children can survive earlier, which is week 22. So he thinks that you need 10 weeks as a. So in a way, I think what you can hear there is that he doesn't want to tell us what he really thinks. So this is what they often do. They are very much into the Sweden debate right now.
And I
he's
think
adapting to the Swedish
exactly,
debate.
and just let me say that, you know, actually gender equality is really not a policy issue that they deal with at all. I mean, they're not really interested in this issue at all, unless you kind of make the connection to immigration. That's where it becomes interesting for the Sweden Democrats. And the interesting thing is that gender equality is something they present as something actually genuinely, you know, from the time of the Vikings. This has been Swedish policy, which of course, you know, we know that the women's movement is really not from the time of the Vikings, really, but it's the women's movement who's pushed, you know, the agenda forward on gender equality. So the connection is just not there, and it's just used.
That is the populist
exactly as a tool, you know, to make another point.
Snezana, could you draw any parallels in Serbia, in the Serbian context, when it comes to abortion rights, for example?
Yes, I can, but first of all, I would like to situate myself somehow in this topic of nationalism and in this discussion. And I have to say that I feel really insecurity when I have to speak English, so I will do my best, but really I apologize to all of you.
We all think you speak very well.
It's really a big challenge for me, so if I have to say something, I will hesitate, so that I will try to set some space to say something about nationalism in Balkan.
We speak Serbian, so if you don't know
Thank you. So, where I came from, actually, I was born in 1961 in a Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia. Then I live in United Republic of Yugoslavia, and then in Community of Serbia and Montenegro, and finally, and now I live in the Republic of Serbia. So it means that I has been changed 4 countries, never changing my place of living, never changing time where I was born, never changing my home where I was born and when I lived for whole my life. So you can imagine what does it mean when you have 4 different countries in which you spend your life, and what kind of feeling you can have if you have that fact in mind. So it's constant insecurity and constant questioning about your identity. You always must ask yourself who I am, what is if I the same person as I was previous. So I think, as Lena said, that nationalism was one of the reasons and one of the cause of the destroying former Yugoslavia. I think probably there a lot of people know here, majority know here that Serbia was part of former Yugoslavia, and then Serbia has a huge, very large responsibility for the events in former Yugoslavia. And now, 15 or 20 years after destroying Yugoslavia, the question is, do we escape nationalism? No. We are still live nationalism in all Balkan, not only in Serbia, but I think in all Balkan. There are the few examples that in all countries of former Yugoslavia, human rights and women's rights particularly and gender equality are very low on the list in the political agenda. For example, in Croatia we have marriage case. Marriage case actually means that recently in Croatia there was a referendum in which they decided to put a statement in their constitution that a marriage is only union between woman and man. So the rest people excluded. In Macedonia, we have restricted abortion rights. I don't know exactly in what way, but I think maybe to make some committee to decide about abortion. But it is restricted. Women from women's organization in Macedonia talked about that. in Slovenia, we had last year there was a large protest against economic situation in Slovenia, but also against corruption and against a leader who ruled the country. The same is Bosnia, and in Bosnia the situation is specific because we have two communities. One community is consists of Bosnian Croats and Bosnian Muslims, while another is from Bosnian Serbs, and they are always in some kind of misunderstanding, let's say misunderstanding, but they are always quarrel somehow, and they always, instead of cooperating, somehow go against each other. And in Serbia, last year, in 2013, we had 43 femicide. 43.
43.
43. 43 women were killed last year in family partners context. So it's, and also this year the government suspended Directory of Gender Equality, saying that people who are saying that member of the directory didn't do their job in a right way, and also government promised that it would establish new directory, new body, independent body of gender equality, but it still doesn't. It still doesn't happen. So all other things which somehow in connection connected in a way with what Annika and Lena talked about, but somehow specific for Balkan. And in Serbia particularly, I would like to emphasize there is something more than in atmosphere, in political climate, you use that word, climate, then in there is not real, there is not rude nationalism, but you always feel that you are in a kind of fast line. They are overproduction of the different scandals, events, and you always feel some kind of insecurity.
I was just going to ask you about nationalism and that the parties in Serbia. It's sometimes said that Serbia no longer has a strong nationalist party or parties anymore. What would you say about this? That these parties are changing their faces, their approach?
No, I think that all parties actually in Serbia are nationalist party, because if you take program of any party, you will see in the first part of that program always that we have to save our nation, our territory, our values, whatever does it mean. So human rights is somewhere low on the list of the priorities, on the list in the programs of whatever, is it Democratic Party or Serbian Progressive Party or Serbian Radical Party. It's almost, I don't say that it's quite that's completely the same, but almost the same.
You said before that when we were discussing this, that it's everywhere really. Nationalism is everywhere. It's rather maybe the status quo than really
it's
the
very
exception.
hard. Sorry, Sarah. It's very hard to make the distinction between who is left, who is right, who is in the center. From my perspective, and women's rights activists, it's very hard to do that. Particularly talking about gender equality and talking about women's rights. So.
I'm just thinking we have talked so much, and I think that it maybe the nationalism is so ingrained that when it's needed, the national card is played. You can just play the national card anytime, in order to make a point, and I think that's important. And the story of their own people's greatness is just plays an important role in politics. And women's sexuality is really linked to the nation, and reproduction is the primary task of women. And so women are encouraged to have more children, and parties, I would say, in all these countries have proposed financial stimulus packages for families. And you could see that, all over especially Croatia, Serbia, and Bosnia.
And Snezana, just to go back to you, I would just like to ask you as well, as a women rights activist, how would you say that this very strong nationalism and climate affects you in your daily life and your colleagues in your work?
Yeah, I have already said, if you feel always insecurity, if you feel that you don't work as you want, that is influence of the nationalism and the politics which is managed in the country. A lot of time we heard insults in the street when we distributed material against women, even against violence against women, which is really. I don't know.
When you're talking about the problem of violence against women,
when we talk about the problems of violence. So there is a lot of bad words toward the activists. And last year in February, there was a blacklist of women's organizations dealing with the women's organization made by one of the most radical groups. We call it Naši. They call it the name of the group is Naši. That means ours. Yeah, and they made blacklist of the prominent human rights organization, accusing them that they are enemy of Serbia, that they are enemies of Serbia, that they are betraying Serbia, that they work for some foreign countries and something like that. So the government also, one of the strategy of the government talking about women's organization and about women's rights is to use work and experience of women's rights organization, but avoid to mention them, marginalize their role, and trying to neglect them, so to make them invisible and using their work and expertise. So there is also state, even it is obliged itself that it will work on protection of women from violence. Support of the government, particularly local governments, to those who work on protection of women from violence is really small and maybe more accidentally than real support. And also, I think that it was also in last year, or maybe 2012, I'm not sure, in a local budget of my town for human rights organization, the anticipated sum was 100,000 dinars, which is about 1,000 euro for human rights organization dealing with for the organization dealing exactly with human rights. So it's really small sum. It's really it's a lack of support is everywhere present. Yeah.
Seems quite clear here how this nationalism, as the antipode of feminism, they are feeling very threatened by the feminist movements, by the women's rights.
They have money for they have money for football club, for example. They have money for army parada. There was a large parada in Kruševac in my town, and the money provided for that. But for work of SOS line, there was not money. So it's.
No, I'm thinking when you speak, Snezana, we had another activist from Sarajevo with us at another point, and she described she's from an LGBT organization that we support in Bosnia, and she describes a meeting that they had where they were actually attacked during the meeting, and people were screaming and hitting and telling them. And I think this is kind of, it shows there is no tolerant people in Sarajevo. There is only normal people in Sarajevo. And I think that's a very telling quote.
Certainly is. And I would like to finally direct a question to you all here. And it's about in countries where perhaps these nationalist parties don't really have that much power yet, so to speak. They can't perhaps influence policy making in a very strong sense, but still they are present. Is their mere existence and presence, is it a threat simply by being there in the public space, would you say? I don't know, maybe Annika, if you want to start.
Well,
to
I think it is very, very clear how also in Sweden, even if maybe not on as large scale as in some other countries, the presence of the Sweden Democrats means that we are spending a lot of time just discussing their issues. Time that we could spend doing other things lost all that time. And what Lena talked about, how you felt last year when there were Sweden Democrats sitting in all the TV sofas, and that is, even though we can see a big reaction against it this year, we could also see in the Almedalen, the park earlier today, how the journalists were standing in line waiting nicely to have a little session with Jimmy Åkesson, and his press secretaries pointed out, you can't, that question is not okay, I'm not going to talk about that, and you can, and all the others just stood there and waiting for their time.
So it's simply a step back, simply that we're talking about.
But it's a very big change from 2010 when I was here following the Sweden Democrats, and they were not in the parliament yet. Then they had no space, they had no room. There is a big difference.
But isn't it interesting how the fact that we have this party now in parliament have kind of paved the way for all kinds of more violent and extremist movements following in their tail, and all of a sudden the Sweden Democrats are, well, they're normal, clean, no problem with them. It's the others,
the party
the Nazis.
Of the Swedes,
yes, exactly, they are the problem, and I think that's a scary development, and I think we really need to be very clear and analyze the situation very clearly so that we see what strategies is at play right now, because there are strategies at play, and I think you said grassroots mobilization, absolutely key here, and I think that Swedish society is rising to the occasion right now. Swedish society says, no, we do not tolerate that this is happening. Well, we need to see that the political parties and the political establishment come with us now and clearly put a stop to a normalization, and it means the establishment in on all levels. So, and that means also the media establishment. They need to be more. They need to have more knowledge on because it's not as it seems first. They need to know the background. They need to know to see what this family comes from. This family of organizations, and that there are really roots. Annika and I always have this conversation about why do we see this now, and in Malmö we had this conversation and we don't really necessarily agree, but and I mentioned that I think that the economic situation now, the fact that we have rising unemployment, 26 million unemployed people in Europe, and we have a breakdown of social systems, we have an economic crisis going on, and that is fertile ground for these kind of movements to rise. But you have a very interesting, I think, take on that.
I think that there has always been fascism. Since early 90s, we've had fascism and nationalism, and they can rise when they reform themselves and they change, the face change. And we could see, I mean, of course, it is true for Greece right now, that the reason why the people are voting for the Golden Dawn, yes. But in the early 2000s, the Danske Folkeparti had their highest, when they got the best results, there was no unemployment at all in Denmark. And right now in Norway, they are the Fremskrittspartiet party is in the government, and they have just outlawed begging, which means the righteous country in Sweden, in Europe, they don't want to see poverty. They want the Romas out.
These are perhaps one of the clearest examples of actually normalization.
This is normalization, and what you were talking before about the repackaging. I mean, look at the Sweden Democrats, how they have changed clothes, how they've changed the words. And I have actually, in English now we say repackaging, and the word in Swedish, ompaketering, I learned from Erik Almqvist, who is a very well-known former Swedish Democrat in Sweden. He used the term and said, we are gaining because we have been successful in repackaging. Actually, our party program of now is the same as 1988.
That's scary.
It really is.
Yeah.
Really very,
And I
very
think
similar.
That's what you were talking about too.
And
Yeah.
more than though just trying to restrain normalization, I'm thinking about how can we become, move beyond this and actually counteract nationalism and these anti-feminist ideas, these restraints on women's rights. What kind of strategies are needed in civil society, among politicians?
I also think that we have to more cooperate each with other, not only at national level but in the international level, to make international community who is strongly against nationalism. I think that will work. It's the only thing that can work. I think yes.
I think so.
Somehow working with more of an international identity somehow, or
No, but I mean,
strengthening
Women issues are
whatever.
Women issues
Yes.
are
women issue, cooperate in women issue, and cooperate to help the organization within the country, and also have kind of international movement. We have kind of, but more.
learning from each other. And,
yes.
and
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean,
Yes.
that's not only though. I mean, we
Yeah, it's
also
not
have
only.
to analyze the situation,
Yes, of
and
course.
we need to make strategies that are, that are sustainable, and it means, organizing, of course, but it needs also to see, what is at play here. How do they make their moves? And I think we tried by this, and I think that to realize and to recognize also from the political level that gender equality, women's issues are one of the central issues here, to bring this up, also together with immigration and issues of diversity, etc. They're all issues that nationalism do not want on the table, and that they don't have policies on this. They are weak on this, and we should expose them. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this report, to expose. And I think that's what Expo is doing, exposing, the nationalists. So I think we have to be very strong there. And I see a positive trend now in the Swedish society. But I do. I mean, we shared also a panel at the Nordic Forum. Just a couple of weeks ago, where 20,000 women's activists from all over the Nordic countries and some international activists as well were gathering, and there was a huge anti-racist, movement playing out. Unfortunately, there were the Nordic gender equality ministers, on the stage at the end, receiving this final document, and that was a moment of normalization, which was bad, and that was a pity because I think the Nordic Forum,
in that
the Nordic Forum was a really
minister.
great thing, exactly. But the minister, the Norwegian minister for gender equality, is from Fremskrittspartiet. She's from this nationalistic party, and she was never challenged on these policies. And I think you have, okay, put them on stage, but challenge their policies, absolutely. And so you have to be clear, you have to analyze, and you have to also look back. What are the values that an organization like Kvinna till Kvinna, for instance, stand for? Well, we agreed. We had a question from the Sweden Democrats: can we visit your partners out in the field in Jordan? Well, we had to go back. We looked at what are the values that we stand for, and we just we said no. I mean, I'm sorry, you're not going to use whatever fight for women's rights that we see in Jordan and other places, in your rhetoric. So for us, it was only natural to say, no, thank you. That's not it. So, and I think more people have to do that.
more exposure, more exposing. We have to round this talk off here now. Time goes by really quick, and we have already one question here. You're going to get a microphone in just a minute.
Jag kan hålla det själv. Det är bättre. Då kanske jag blir av med den. Nej då, ska inte. My name is Inger Axel. I noticed that all of you in the beginning, you didn't call those parties that we are discussing neo-fascists party. In my view, many of them are fascist parties or neo-fascist, if you like to say that, including Sweden's Democrats. But now, Annika, you used it at the end here now. But could you explain to me why you don't call them as the fascist party? Because I think that is stopping the normalization process a bit. Could be a weapon.
Annika, would you like to respond?
Well, I think it is an academic question whether you use that term or not. I know, but I do. And that is because I think it is very clear that some are more fascist. That is very clear. But I think it is important to not be stuck on labels, because what we are seeing now is a normalization where things don't look the same anymore. So if we try to always look for what it used to look like, there's a risk that we miss things. The things that doesn't look fascist can be worse than fascism. Fascism is an old term. We have now, for example, the party in Geert Wilders' party. There's no way, no one will call them fascists. But he is the worst anti-Muslim, which is the biggest threat to Muslims we have in Europe.
Yes, up front.
Hi, my name is Salma Gusic. I come from an organization called Youth Against Racism here in Sweden. And while you were talking, I was thinking about the term militarization that Cynthia Enlow, I know, uses, talking about the process that when we get scared, when we feel the insecurity, how we need to protect ourselves. And in a way, I would say that the Nazist, racist, fascist organizations, they create both the insecurity and then they provide the security. And I'm just wondering, have you seen, for example, in Sweden, we've long have I would say a discourse on security, on militarization, police that's been more kind of, we are so peaceful and we don't use those tactics and stuff like this. But can you see that while nationalism has been kind of increasing in Sweden, and that the discourse on our military and on the police have changed? Because for me, I'm from Bosnia, and I think that is a really, when you start to kind of, gather the police and the military and start to think about the resources that goes to them because the nation is unsecure, that then it's really gone too far. Do you see that? Do you understand my question?
Who would like to answer?
No, I can't say that that we see those trends today. Not at all. Not now. But I mean, it all depends on how civil society mobilizes and how the political establishment kind of receives this. I mean, we will see a development there for sure, but we're not there yet. And quite frankly, so far, Swedish political establishment have responded pretty good, I would say. To this. But we want, of course, to see more of action and more concerned action.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we have any Twitter questions?
Yes, we have.
Do? Okay.
Hello, we have a question from Milla Järvelin. Is nationalism a threat merely by being in public space? Very broad question.
Who would like to answer?
How can you explain nationalism a threat just by being in the public space?
In the rhetoric, perhaps.
Tricky question.
Well, I think that the idea that the basic idea of nationalism is to say we as a group have something in common and we should focus on that against them. And as soon as they start doing that, they start questioning other loyalties. You should be loyal to just your nationality. And I think it creates problems right away with, for example, exactly against feminism, who tries to be, you want to be loyal with all women all around the world. And here, for example, during the war, you had to be questioned, are you a good Serb? Because you, but
Always,
as I understand it, there was a good cooperation with Croatian women, because yes, nationalism threatened that cooperation between women, for example, or
Nationalism excludes.
Yes.
Feminism includes. But of course, I think Europe has its history, right? We can just go back to its history, and see what nationalism actually inflicted on Europe in terms of devastation, war, death and conflict. So I suppose I will have to say yes to the question then.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Yes.
My name is Cornelia Norman. I'm a student at Uppsala University. I was thinking about the Russian aggression outwards, which we've seen lately. And as in Russia, the idea of the woman and the family plays a really big part in both civil society and in politics. And as politicians they have rebaptized Europe as gay Europe, even. And I wonder what you think will come out of this clash between views as it is used in the conflict.
Great question. Who wants to answer? Who feels the urge?
I think that that Russia made aggression. It's my opinion, and. But I actually was once in Russia and worked with women who dealing with women's rights. And my impression was that there is not women activists in a sense we talk about. There is more in a sense on former communists. So women, all places are available to women, but without awareness of what does it mean, and without making theory about that, what does it mean for women. So I think that not only women in Russia, but women in all Soviet Union countries somehow out of women's movement. So I would like them, because there is a lot of women, there is a large number of women, I would like them more to be included and maybe more to work with them and to cooperate with them. And I think it's really important. It could be somehow one of the aspects. I don't know, is it or something like that. Sorry.
I think we have room for one last question. And we'll have to... There's one over here.
Hi, I just have a question about the fact that you just talked about our history and nationalism that we've seen before. How strong do you think the parallel is between what's happening now and what's happened previously with the Jews, for example? Because some people find it disgusting that it happened so recently and that we should have learned more by now. But from what I see, it feels like the trends that we've seen, they're slightly, touching upon the same issues and the same, following of minorities that we've seen before. So how strong do you think that parallel is?
I think there is I think there is a parallel, but I think we can learn from history, but history never reinvents itself. It never repeats itself. It looks different, when it kind of evolves, but we should certainly learn. That's my, take. And of course, we do not want to... Why do we have the European Union? We have the European Union because it was built on the ashes of the Second World War, because we will not see war in Europe again. And so the European Union, for me, is the answer. Unfortunately, we will have to fill it up with good policies and so on, and maybe we think it's weak, but I mean, it's better to die. It's better to sit around... better to sit around tables as bureaucrats than to die in the battlefields as soldiers. So, I mean, that's how I see it.
Of course, we do have more members of parliament in the European Parliament now that are nationalistic and all of these different shapes,
and
more
they
than
are
ever.
anti-European. They are anti-EU. That's also a lesson learned.
Yes, they're very anti-EU. We had yesterday, there was they opened the opening for the next year, and there's 2 Sweden Democrats that have been elected turned their backs to when they were playing the anthem, the European. They did stand up and turn their backs.
They've
yesterday.
learned from us then.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yes. And
thank you very much. Some
I
last
just
words
wanted
from
to
Annika.
say about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is on the rise and very, very strong in, for example, Hungary. And you can see it in different places. But what we can see now is how the minorities that are being targeted are changing, so that if you look at the Sweden Democrats, that used to be an anti-Semitic party, you can't really say that it's not so strong, at least the anti-Semitism in the Sweden Democrat. In the election 2010, it was mainly an anti-Muslim party. And I interviewed many Sweden Democrats at that time, and I remember asking Kent Ekeroth, who was also with Erik Almqvist out with iron things for some years ago, and I asked him, so what do you think of the Roma people? And he looked at me like, what? Well, they are not a problem because they're not on the streets making a bit mess. And 3 years later, one of the Sweden Democrats' most important issue and their big enemy are the Roma people. So they're always willing to find a new enemy, a new target for their hate.
Okay, we have to round off here before we give the panel a big round of applause. I have to say a few last things. You can download the report Patriotism and Patriarchy on the internet in Swedish or English. There will be a few more seminars here tonight. I'm going to do this in Swedish. Säkerhetspolitiskt försnack med Sverigedemokraterna 17:45 till 18:10. And then 18:15 till 18:40 säkerhetspolitiskt försnack med Vänsterpartiet. So if you're interested in coming here again to hear those seminars, you're very welcome. And then finally, thank you very much, Lena, Snezana, and Annika, for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.